Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for attending today's meeting. First of all, I've got to read out a statement of the protocols to be followed during this meeting of the Environment and Housing Committee. Please note that the meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube and the recording will be made available for public viewing following the meeting. Can members please mute their microphones throughout the meeting when not speaking? This is important since it helps to ensure the quality of the audio for all present. Your microphone should be switched on when invited to speak and switched off when you have finished speaking. Please use the raise hand button to indicate that you wish to speak at any point. Can I also ask that officers introduce themselves by confirming their name and role before speaking for the first time on any item? If any member lose connection or have technical issues during the meeting, please alert the clerk as soon as possible, either using the chat function within the meeting or by email or telephone. I'll now ask the clerk to carry a roll call of the elected members participating in today's meeting. Michelle.
Thank you. Councillor Errol.
Present.
Councillor Gibson.
Present.
Councillor Houston.
Present.
Councillor Hutchison.
Present.
Councillor McPherson.
Yeah.
Councillor Majuri.
Present.
Councillor McGill.
I'm here.
Councillor Thompson.
Present.
And Councillor Tolamash.
Excuse me, as I move. Excuse me, yes, I'm here.
Thank you. That's all members present.
Okay, thank you. Apologies and substitutions. We're all present, so that's good to know. Declarations of interest. I've none. Anybody has anything to declare on the agenda? No. Okay, urgent business brought forward. I've nothing to bring forward, but I would like to say that I intend to withdraw the paper on replacement of the refuse collection vehicles. The paper was initially written to go to an earlier meeting of this committee, and some of the information contained is not up to date. So what I intend to do is to take it to a special meeting in December. We're already preparing a special meeting to deal with Walk Cycle Live Stirling, a contract award, if that's acceptable. So we'll make it 2 items. So that will be sometime in December. Michelle's making arrangements to carry out that duty. Okay, so right, minutes of meeting. I'll go through it page by page as usual. If there's any corrections, if you could let me know. Page 1. Page 2.
Oh, yes, page 2, I think.
Okay, Councillor Majuri.
Yeah, so just on about the total broken glass removal cases and needle uplift cases to include the total cases rather than individual cases. I think it was also to include total cases as opposed to just cases within the SLA on that. Or in addition to the cases within the SLA.
Which officer is dealing with that? Is that your recollection of the decision? Bruce, Ricky?
Thanks, Convener. It's Bruce Rickey, Senior Manager for Environment and Place. Yeah, just confirming some of those figures, and we will send that information out. We obviously, in terms of recording, we had the SLA information. We're now collating the total numbers that are coming through. They're obviously collected across a number of service departments, so we're collating that information together, and we'll certainly provide that to Councillor Majuri and obviously the rest of the committee as well.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's for it to be included in the report going forward as well. Thank you.
Okay, if the minutes can be corrected to explain that. Okay, thank you. Page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, and page 7. Okay, we'll accept them as a true record. Thank you. Okay, turning to the action log, if we could run through that. I won't go through it page by page, but if there's any matters of concern to members, if you could let me know. Councillor Earl.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. First of all, a general point, and when you go through this action log, I think I totted up there were 13 items that were marked. The latest in the comments was marked 5th of October, email sent by Democratic requesting update, or words to that effect. I mean, that's an awful lot of items that are sitting at that status, and I would have expected, you know, responses to have received by them, and you know, would this not have been sort of sorted at pre-agenda?
You're right, Councillor Earl, that very point was made, and officers were asked to update it, but I'm just assuming that they haven't been able to get to that point. But it's a well-made point, and I'll expect all these questions to be in the next agenda. Councillor Tolmach.
Right.
Okay, I was going to make that point at the same time, so just to add to that, on EH173, speed limit, okay, the policy. Can I ask, did the council input into the Scottish government review?
Okay, again, Bruce Rickey.
Thanks, Convener. Bruce Rickey, Senior Manager for Environment and Place. Yeah, Alistair, Councillor Tolomash, when we had received the road safety plan, we had commented upon that as part of the consultation. So a response went from the service in relation to the National Road Safety Plan.
Okay, thank you for that. EH198. Can I ask on this one, after the consultation is done and all the comments, will this come back to the committee, or will there be a plan?
Looks like Alistair's frozen. Martin, did you want to come back in?
I'm frozen. Have I?
Alistair, we lost you there. You'll need to repeat that.
Okay, am I back again?
You're back. Yep.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, I will repeat that then. EH198. Once the consultations and all the consultation is completed, will this come back to the committee for a review, and what's the process for next year? Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Bruce, you want to answer that? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Thomas. Yes, it was just to confirm that following the consultation, it will come back to committee. Obviously, the plans for next year will be very much based upon the engagement exercise and some of the feedback that we get. But obviously, we'll be picking up in terms of some of the lessons learned from this year's work that we undertook in terms of long grass areas, wildflower seeding as well, and equally in terms of communications with local communities. So that will be picked up in terms of our work programme for next year, Councillor Tolmash.
You're muted, Alistair.
I'm having a problem with my technology this morning. Excuse me. On EH254, it was just about, we've had no update on what powers, if the Stirling Council is using its powers for stopping people parking with their the engine's going. I think that's just a point from we made earlier. That would be very good to get an update.
Drew, and then Linda.
Yeah, I'll just, that's a piece of work that we have been doing, and just to apologise, there are a couple of updates in my service that haven't been covered off, but a lot of the work has been done based on those items in the rolling action log, and in the coming days, some of the briefings will be coming out to members on these things, so we have been committed to working through them, but we've not caught the dates that we aimed for. But I'll let Linda come in on the engine idling as well.
Good morning, everybody. Linda Hill, Regulatory Services Manager, acting. Just to confirm, the briefing note is drafted and should come out to you in the next few days, but I wanted to confirm that Stirling Council is a designated authority under the Road Traffic Vehicle Emissions Regulations, Section 4, to utilise engine idling enforcement powers. We are currently doing a period of monitoring around areas in Stirling to identify the extent of the problem, and we are working with local schools around materials to support the education in relation to this area. We are members of the East of Scotland Vehicle Emissions Partnership. They support this education and advice work, and they are also working with local schools for what can be provided, because we feel that a change in people's culture and behaviour around engine idling is going to be what will really make a huge difference here. However, the authority is designated to issue fixed penalties for engine idling.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much for that, because I get a lot of feedback of people, especially especially outside schools.
Okay, I'll go back to Councillor Earl. I cut you off, Alice. Martin, sorry about that.
That's all right. Thanks, Jim. Just a couple of points. The EH149, the A811 petition, I mean, that's double bubbled on there, and it's on the latest one is on page 20. It's just say that this doesn't seem to particularly move forward from a point of view of any consultation with landowners and utility companies. And I was just to try and get some kind of timescale of when those actual conversations might take place and when we might be looking at a report back to committee on it. I've got another one as well after that.
Yeah. Bruce.
Thanks, Councillor Earl. When we looked at the junction design, and I think it was option 3 we were progressing, if I remember correctly, Councillor Earl, it was felt it was best actually come up with a design in the first instance so that we had a better indication of the actual sort of land take and modifications that we may require for that junction improvement. And we wish to go forward with that to landowners, because I think that would be one of the first questions we would ask in terms of saying, what's the extent of this? Unfortunately, we've had resourcing issues there, both internally and externally, to try and get that design work done. And we're trying to see if we can, whether we can do that internally or externalise as well. Once that design work is done, we'll obviously quickly move to having that consultation and discussion with the landowners. And I'll go back to the team just to see if we can get a firmed up timescale and refer back to you on that. Okay, all right, thank you, I appreciate that.
EH264 on page 23. I haven't received anything about that's one of them, so I really would like that an update on that if I can get it. But I know, Jim, you talked about you know, the action log being updated for the next committee meeting. I'm not sure whether that's the special or the scheduled, but could I ask, could we actually just get an update on this sent round to committee members as quickly as possible, because there are quite a number here, and as Drew is saying, if what his service, and is the same for other services, that a lot of this has been done, it would be probably quite easy just to get this updated action log distributed quickly after this meeting. And I can say that the salt bins has been done, so that I have received that information, so that one can be closed off, which is EH267.
Thank you. Okay, Drew, you want to respond to the?
Yeah, just Drew Leslie, Senior Manager for Infrastructure. Yeah, Councillor Earl, the initial briefing on the CCTV's been done as well, so that'll be circulated shortly as well. There's a fair bit of work going into that, and there's obviously live work going on with CCTV as it is at the moment in facilitating improvements, so that'll be circulated in the coming week.
Okay, thank you. Right, no other hands up. Are we content to move on to the next item? Okay, thank you.
Brian.
Oh, sorry, Brian, I didn't see your hand up there. Brian Roberts.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Brian Roberts, Chief Operating Officer for Infrastructure Environments. Just picking up on the comments from yourself and other committee members on the lack of updates in the report. Can I suggest, Chair, that we take it away and we provide an update to all members next week, within the next 5 working days, on the status of all of them, and that can then be obviously updated formally to committee in the next meeting, which is a special one. But we can make sure the officers have got an update on each of those lines next week, so that committee can see that action is being taken. You've had the verbal from some officers today, but I think it's important that you see it written down.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. I'll have a chat with you offline on that one. Thanks for that. Michelle, you've got...
Yeah, it's just to say that the rolling action log will be presented to the February committee, not to the special meeting. Just to clarify.
Yeah, thank you for that. Okay.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. We'll move on to the next item, item 6, performance and strategic priorities. I believe Isabel and Brian are going to present this.
I'll present it, Chair. So Brian Roberts, for the purpose of video, Brian Roberts, Chief Operating Officer for Infrastructure and Environment. So this is the update for this committee for the performance and strategic priorities report for the activities that are governed under Environment and Housing Committee, set out in the usual format, with Appendix 1 providing the indicators, including the local government benchmarking framework information, and Appendix 2 providing the exception report details on indicators that are at risk and at red. There are a number of senior managers and service managers on the call that cover those areas like service activities. So committee are asked to consider the current performance and comment on that, and officers will be happy to take any questions on the detail of those questions.
Right, open up for questions. Councillor Paul.
Okay, thank you. On the average length in the temporary accommodation, is there an explanation on why in September that seems to increase quite a lot?
Could I ask Alistair, you tell us what page it is before I invite officers to reply?
Page number 31.
31, thank you.
Oh, okay, the scorecard.
Okay, Stephen Clark.
Thanks for your question, Councillor Tolmash. It's Stephen Clark here, Chief Officer for Housing. Yeah, this really relates, this stat relates to when people are then provided with permanent accommodation. So it's really tracking how long they've been in temporary accommodation for until they receive a permanent let. So it really depends on the people and the circumstances of them up till them receiving a let. And I suppose there'll be some longer delays that have occurred because of last year, because there was less availability of social lets, because less people were moving, ending with tenancies and so on. So I'm hopeful that the figure will start to go down as things become more normal and we have more properties to let.
Okay, thank you for that. And does that, of course, mean that people won't be able to get into this, the accommodation, and they might have to stay elsewhere in the meantime? So it has the knock-on effect.
Sorry, could you clarify that? Sorry.
Yes. So if they can't move into the permanent, for those other people who need to go into the temporary, but they might have to stay either in a bed and breakfast or elsewhere.
Well, what we've done, we've increased our stock of temporary accommodation quite significantly. Partly because of the unsuitable accommodation order, where we need to stop using bed and breakfast accommodation for prolonged periods of time. So we have a bigger stock of temporary accommodation now. So most people in temporary accommodation will be using dispersed lets in the community as opposed to bed and breakfast accommodation.
Okay, thank you. And yeah, Convener, so I have another question. Would you like me to go on to that?
Yeah, carry on, yeah.
Thank you. And it's in page number 32, and it's the amount of waste going to the landfill. I just wondered if there was an indication, following the changes to the collection, if we don't have an October figure. I understand it is an indication whether that has moved up or down.
Thanks, Councillor Tollemache. It's Bruce Rickey, Senior Manager for Environment and Place. Note at this stage, there's obviously a bit of a time lag in terms of collating the information, Councillor Tollemache, and obviously once that information becomes available, it will be included within the performance report, and happy to share that information earlier if you so wish.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree, Councillor Tollemache. It will be interesting to see the long-term issues here. But I do know that when we get to the sustainable Stirling report, there is a section on the waste, and it looks to be going in the right direction, irrespective of the change to the bin collection. Councillor McGill.
Hi, thanks. I just wondered if I could ask a question about the how emergency and non-emergency repairs to housing. I'm not very sure what page number this is actually. It's on the front of the Appendix 1. And I just wondered, is that all the repairs that are reported in, or is that just the repairs that are attempted to be completed, if you know what I mean? And how, you know, was there an increase in that over the COVID period? Just more people being in the house, I suppose, for longer periods.
Stephen, are you able to answer that?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, thanks for your question, Councillor McGill. In terms of the repair times, you'll notice there's a few months where we don't have data. It's not that we don't have the data yet. It's just that the way we're having to report that has changed a little bit, and we're just revising our methods for that. You'll see that the non-emergency repairs are a little bit higher in terms of the number of days, and that's because we were coming out of the lockdown restriction period where we weren't undertaking non-emergency repairs. So we had a backlog to work through, which we completed around about the end of June, I believe. So that'll be coming back to a normal situation. So during the lockdown periods, we were undertaking less repairs because we were only undertaking emergency repairs during those periods where there was a really high risk and we weren't able to enter properties unless there was an emergency. I would say that's pretty normalised now in terms of the numbers of non-emergency and emergency repairs we're dealing with now. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Earl.
Thank you. Couple of points. First of all, right on the covering page of the report, page 27, background 1.2, a review of the waste scorecard indicators is underway. I just wonder when we can have an indication of when they might be ready to present, and will they be brought for committee to agree prior to being introduced into the scorecard?
I can't tell you about the timing, but I'm quite happy to have discussions. There was the waste working group, which hasn't met for quite some time, to be fair, and that was where I had intended to debate it. But as for timelines, Bruce, have you got an idea there?
Sorry, Councillor Thompson, I don't have a time scale at this point in time, but I can certainly speak to the team to get an update on that. And I think it was really just to review the indicators to bring them back so that they weren't just sort of data only and they were more relevant to the services that we were providing at this stage. But I'll certainly pick up in terms of timescale and report back, convener. Okay, and I'll have a chat with you about how we decide which ones to bring forward and involve people in that process. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if there's a...
Oh, sorry. I thought Isabel was going to come in on that point.
Yes, Isabel McKnight, Chief Operating Officer, Communities and Performance. Yes, it was just to say that any agreed indicators would need to be in consultation with the convener and deputy convener. Thank you.
Martin, further points?
Right, and the other point is page 37, average time taken to relet properties, which has got a comprehensive narrative underneath it. Question that came to me was, can we get the data that show the voids by area? where it will indicate, be one of the indicators to show where properties are harder or easier to let.
Yeah, thanks for your question, Councillor Earl. We can provide a breakdown of data if it's something that would be useful to members. If it's harder to let properties that you may be interested in, we could maybe just specifically focus on the number of properties where it's taken multiple times to let those properties. I would say it's less of an issue about the area the property is in. It's more the property type. It's you generally don't find it that hard to let, for example, a mid-terraced or an end-terraced house, but a third floor tenement flat is generally pretty hard to let anywhere in Stirling. Okay,
yeah, thank you, Stephen. I mean, if I'd be interested to know from a ward perspective, from that point of view, you know, I don't know other members, that's up to them, but any information on that would be helpful to me.
Okay.
No other hands up. Shall we move on to the next item, which is to note that report? Okay, thank you. Right. Community safety team. Drew, is it yourself introducing this paper?
Linda's going to take this one today, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Linda, over to you.
Thank you. I introduced this paper detailing the enforcement action undertaken by the community safety team between the 1st of July 2020 and the 8th of September 2020. Points from the paper to mention: the team restructure was finalised earlier in the year and recruitment has been completed. There have been a few further vacancies following some internal movement, and these vacancies are currently in the recruitment process and expected to be appointed around Christmas. The paper notes the antisocial behaviour team are utilising the Noise app. This is a smartphone app for people with active cases and allows them to submit noise recordings. These recordings can be reviewed by the investigating officer and determine whether the noise can be progressed for action. So the smartphone app is a case management tool for active cases. The public space CCTV network is under review, and a full asset management plan in terms of the cameras and hardware and identifying future replacements is underway. Ringo, the cashless parking option, has gone well. There were a few technical issues that have now been resolved. The issues related to zones, but not significantly impacted upon the overall rollout. And the initial data indicates that Ringo take-up across the council area is very, very positive. And we're starting to see the benefit of the completion of our recruitment and restructure across the service. And a big thank you to the staff across the community safety team for their hard work, bringing a very challenging year together. I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Okay. Thanks, Linda. Councillor Majuri.
Yes, thank you. So just page 51, appendix 2, obviously looking at the antisocial cases. So I can see we have two where we've got the eviction action progressed format. Is that the same as the cases progressed to legal action? Are those different? Similarly for the other tenancy enforcement, you've given one example of changing from secure to the Scottish short term tenancy format. What other sort of tenancy enforcement could that include? Thank you.
Councillor, I'm sorry, I'm not entirely certain. I'll have to come back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Councillor Tolmack.
Okay, thank you. I think there's a possible mistake on page the 50 when it says the Henderson Street Dunblane. I think that should mean Henderson Street Balance.
Yes, councillor.
I think if residents may think there's been a lot happened there. So, just on another thing on the tipping. What's the average length of the time before you get a report on fly tipping before it's picked up? Because I had a report, I did one, and it was picked up on the same day, and the residents were very pleased with that. So I just wanted to know what the average time was for that. Thank you.
When we receive the reports of fly tipping, the officers go out as soon as possible, hopefully the same day, to ascertain the fly tipping, ascertain any intelligence or any evidence we can gather regarding the perpetrators of the fly tipping, and the matter is then flagged up and is collected by colleagues. This is all done as soon as possible. I can ascertain average times for you, Councillor, but I don't know the average times off the top of my head.
Thank you. And of the 101 the cases that I've talked about, what number are being investigated and what number actually results in action being taken?
Action, I can get those figures for you as well, Councillor. Action is taken where we can readily identify the person who had undertaken the fly tipping. So a cursory search is undertaken of the material to ascertain if there is anything that would identify who's fly tipped there, and then follow-up action is taken with regards to that person.
If there are any actions taken where would the public find out that action has been taken? So if they reported a particular incident, would they be able to find out that, if the council was able to find out who done it, what action taken? Is there a way for the public to find that out?
I wouldn't imagine so, Councillor, but I could take legal advice around this, because obviously the outcome of this could be the issuing of a fixed penalty notice or further referral to the Procurator Fiscal's office, and that would be, we do not usually disclose the specific details of criminal interventions. However, I can find out from legal how we could go about that, Councillor.
Yeah. I think, Linda, without actually knowing the details, it would be useful if the committee is made aware of successful prosecutions or notices.
Yeah, definitely, Councillor. That definitely we can do.
Okay, thanks, Linda.
Yeah.
Okay. Councillor Earl.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Couple of questions. First of all, page 46, 2.3 at the top. Developing a new antisocial behaviour policy, which I'm very pleased to see. It's in draft format. A couple of points about that. I suppose, when was the last one agreed? Because from my recollection, it was quite a while ago, and it's probably needed doing before now, but I can't remember, but we're getting there now. And I'd like an indication from officers as to when we're going to see that, and how different they are drafting up this from what already exists. Is it going to be a major reworking or a tweak?
Okay, Councillor, yes, you're quite correct. The antisocial behaviour policy is very much out of date, and the review has been commenced. From my understanding of it, well, it's not a tweak, it is a full overhaul of the policy, and it's currently between ourselves and our colleagues in legal and senior managers for agreement. Right,
so would we, Linda, be expecting to see that at the next scheduled E&H?
I would hope so, Councillor, but it will require all parties to agree on the content internally before we would present it.
Okay.
Drew Leslie wants to come in there on that point.
Yeah, I was just, I think, sorry, Drew Leslie, Senior Manager for Infrastructure. I think I saw the advice, and I would need to clarify that it would need to go to council, this policy, and I think the obviously we need to work around various services that are involved in this policy as well, and then there would be engagement with members further as well on it, but from my recollection, it would be to go to council. So,
right.
Drew, on that point, certainly I know I've put some input to your team leader there, Dan Hartles. Is it still possible for officers to receive suggestions from members?
Absolutely. I think I'll have a discussion with Linda on the engagement to date, and we'll check in on what more is needed in that, in terms of that, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, because that'd be really helpful, because I think there would be be useful for elected members to have a chance to input into this. Whether they can see a draft in confidential form or not, I don't know, but it would be helpful to guide comments if we had something to respond to on it, because, you know, picking up on Linda's point, all parts of the council involved in this, relevant to this, have got to agree. What I'd be interested to know is if there is areas where that requires adjustments and changes to what's being proposed because other aspects of the council are not content with or raise other queries about them. I'd like to know where the friction points are on this, because I suspect the desire is to beef up our antisocial behaviour policy as much as possible, and I'd like to know if that's rubbing up against other parts of the council where they might not feel that that's appropriate.
Okay.
If you could check with legal, Drew.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Graham, I don't know if I've got just one other point I want to ask about the noise app. That was all. I'd be quite. Could we get a little note on this, please, because we're getting people asking us about its use and how it can be used, and wanting to ask about having it to utilise it. So it would be quite useful. I would find it useful to have some information specifically about the noise app, and I know a couple of other councillors in our group have asked about it and asked me to raise it. So that would be useful, and I'd quite like to understand about the threshold that's being talked about from a point of view of that I'm assuming is nationally and legislatively set, and there is no criteria or flexibility with us about how we determine what an acceptable threshold for a complaint would be.
Yes, Councillor, we can get a paper brought forward around the noise app, a brief for the councillors. Just to reconfirm, the noise app is a case management tool. That's how we're using it. We're using it in comparison to the diary sheets that would have been kept in the past. And the noise app is a smartphone app for an active case that the officers then have to listen to the recordings. So it's quite labour intensive to go through this. And as I say, it's a case management tool, but I will have a briefing brought forward for yourselves.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Houston.
Thanks, Chair. Just going to go back to the review of the policy on antisocial behaviour. I think it is important that this is circulated to members, because I'm concerned that it's all internal amongst officers, and then they produce what is their kind of final version, if you like, and then it comes to us. And we're seen then to criticise it rather than to contribute towards it in its earlier stages. And I think it's more helpful for us to understand the direction of travel and to highlight any kind of omissions or potential problems with it. I also wanted to ask about how this sits alongside the review of CCTV, because, you know, the provision of CCTV doesn't necessarily make people feel safer. It doesn't do anything to enhance or change the actions that go on. It kind of moves an area away. Those two things surely must be considered together. Here is the policy. This is what we want to achieve. This is a change in the deployment of the resource, but part of that resource should be our CCTV coverage, I would imagine. So we're making sure that we kind of align those two things as we come to decide on a new policy on this. Thanks.
Yes, Councillor, we are. You'll be aware that there is also an ongoing review of the public space open CCTV network, including upgrades to the network. We're currently working on the command and control centre, and that is with our partners for quotes. We're looking to enhance the quality of the cameras that we provide and modernise the entire network. I am aware that the officers, we are planning member engagement regarding the antisocial behaviour policy. So I think maybe we've mentioned it here and just maybe predated these meetings, but I am aware that there was definitely a plan to engage with members rather than present you with our finalised version, as you said.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Linda. Drew, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just reinforce that point on member engagement for us. I think, as Linda said, and in speaking with Dan, the overhaul of the policy was really important and the internal consultation amongst officers, and I think we'll certainly be progressing it in a sort of collaborative way with members. And just picking up on the point on the CCTV as well, I know Councillor Thompson, you highlighted certain areas that you would like to, from your experience that you've gained just in the last week to me, and we would be looking at those areas as well when we're looking at the camera network as well.
Okay, that's good. So that can be organised as quickly as it can. Right, no other questions. Linda, thanks for that, and the point that you made about your officers. They do a grand job under difficult circumstances, so please pass on our thanks to them. And we note the report. Okay, thank you. Move on to the next one. Housing revenue account. Stephen Clark, you going to talk to that?
Thanks, Councillor Thompson. Yeah, Stephen Clark here, Chief Officer for Housing. Okay, so this report provides an update on the current income and expenditure relating to the housing revenue account. Section 2.3 of the report notes that we're projecting higher costs for repairs and maintenance. Section 2.10 of the report shows how much we're borrowing this year, just over £30 million. The main reason for the high level of borrowing is that we're undertaking a significant number of new build developments at the moment and second-hand purchases as well. Section 2.13 and 2.14 of the report provide a summary of progress in terms of capital works, and Appendix 1 shows our income and expenditure, with Appendix 2 showing our spending on the capital programme. You can see we're not spending as much in some of these areas and things like kitchens, where there's been some supply issues. So in terms of recommendations, committee is asked to note that, first of all, expenditure in the housing revenue account for 2021-22 is projected to be 22.701 million. Secondly, the year-end retained balances are projected to remain at 986,000. Thirdly, expenditure on the housing investment programme is projected to be 23.405 million. And finally, the borrowing requirement for 2021-22 is projected to be 13.324 million. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Earl and Councillor Majuri.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Thank you, Stephen. It was just, you mentioned 2.3. I wonder if you could just give an explanation of the various factors that are contributing to that. I think it'd be useful to have that at committee. I know it's been talked about in other forums, but that would be helpful.
Yes, certainly. I suppose that the main thing to note really is that it's not that there's an overspend in repairs and maintenance. It's normally just how we apportion costs. So our team work on capital works, and that is how that side of the service receives an income. So if we're not doing as much capital works, the money for salaries has to be apportioned somewhere. My colleague Gillian Mackenzie might be on the line, and she might be able to provide a little bit more detail than that. Gillian?
Thanks, Stephen. Gillian Mackenzie, Service Accounting for Housing Services. Yeah, effectively, as you're saying there, Stephen, that technical services kind of operates on a basis of recovering all its costs by charging out the costs that it's incurring either back to the capital programme or the housing revenue account, or perhaps some external customers, or to even the general fund itself. Generally, because we are not able to deliver as much in terms, or we're not expecting to be able to deliver as much in terms of capital installations, either because of the issues around getting procurement issues and supply issues, or maybe just the restrictions that are meaning that the teams can't be in at the same level putting in the installations. We're expecting less income on that basis. And as you say, it's not specifically an overspend, it's just a bit of an underfunding, because they would normally recover all their costs. And this extra 2 million is related to the monies that we're not getting back in income, if that explains it properly.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Majuri?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so this page 57, you obviously detail your plan renewals for the internal works, your plan renewals for external works of the houses, so your roofs, wall insulation, etc. And obviously you have a section on the new house building and conversions and stuff. But what what appears to be missing is sort of an update on exterior spaces or outdoor spaces that are within the purview of the housing revenue. So I know you're responsible for some access lanes and some paths, as opposed to that being around services. They come back and say that's housing as opposed to themselves from that. So it'd be good to see the plans you've got to maintain or upgrade some of those spaces from it. So some have certainly appear to have been neglected for quite some time. So it'd be good to see it detailed in the report, the plans to update those areas that are fall under housing, which, as there aren't houses, perhaps comes as a surprise to some people, but do fall under the housing team. Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Councillor Majuri. I think my colleague Gregor Whiteman may be able to respond a little bit more detail into the works we do in this area, but it's certainly something that I'm aware of, that some of our areas, potentially communal areas, might need some work if they're a bit neglected, but Gregor Whiteman might be able to provide a bit more detail.
Yep, Gregor Whiteman, Property and Private Sector Housing Manager, Housing Services. Councillor, normally on a year-to-year basis, the expenditure in those areas is classed as maintenance, so wouldn't show up on the capital programme. From time to time, we know that there's investment required, say in unadopted roads or footpaths that are out with the curtilages of tenanted properties, or owner-occupiers are not responsible for a share. We would then show that in the capital investment programme in any given year to show that spend. So I remember the last time we did a significant amount of upgrade works was in unadopted roads, where we'd agreed with roads, if we brought certain roads and footpaths up to an adoptable standard and was signed off, then they would then take on the maintenance thereafter. So usually on a year-to-year basis, it's maintenance only. It's small sums of money in terms of odd tarmac repair, etc., the odd fencing repair. So it's not a big enough item that it would show up on capital spend. I know that as part of the rent consultation for next year, there is an item being proposed as part of the rent consultation where we do spend a little bit more money on environmental improvements, as we call them. So there'll be more detail on that once the rent consultation is finalised and the proposed capital investment programme for next year is then presented to Council for approval.
Thanks. Yeah, no, certainly I'm aware of at least one park, path through a park, which belongs to housing, so that's perhaps one that could be doing with an upgrade, so it can then be adopted by land services from that. I think I can access when there's probably little chance of it being adopted by roads, but it could probably do with a bit more actual investment, as opposed to it's been sort of repairs and patching over the past 5 years and seem to be fairly neglected prior to that. But yeah, thank you.
Councillor Houston.
Thank you, Chair. It's on page 61, the housing revenue account, the second part down about the incomes. I'm just curious about the budget and the outturn. They're exactly matched, and given the period of upheaval that we've gone through, to see that the outturn is exactly what was predicted in the budget is somewhat surprising to me. Garages, for instance, 229,000 exactly. I know the team are under huge pressure and working in a backlog, so I wonder why, given that the backlog they're working on, the pressure they're working on, how we can say that we've got that exactly what we budgeted for. Rents for commercial properties, given the pressure that businesses have been under, exactly what we anticipated. So I'm just questioning, I suppose, the veracity of the numbers that we're looking at. In that, as I say, in unsettled and challenging times, we've got exactly an outturn that we budgeted for. I just wanted to give clarification and confirmation of that.
Thanks for your question, Councillor Houston. It's important to note that we really have to have both of these numbers exactly matching. We're not allowed to have an underspend. If you note on the first, second, third, fourth, I think on the fifth line, you'll see there's a significant underspend in terms of what we thought we'd transfer to the investment programme from revenue. So that has been one of the things that we've had to do to mitigate against a lower income because of increased arrears, etc. My colleague Gillian Mackenzie might be able to provide a little bit more detail in terms of the projections, but we were adjusting these throughout the year, to address basically shortfalls in terms of expenditure income coming in. Gillian, do you maybe want to speak to that a little bit more, please?
Thanks, Stephen. And Gillian Mackenzie, Service Accountant for Housing Services again. You're correct in what you say, Stephen, in terms of the transfer to the investment programme. We use that as the balance in terms of everything coming back to zero and the income matching the expenditure. However, to address Graham's point, from the information that we've got coming through the finance ledger at the moment, we're projecting that the income will be at that level. Obviously, if we get better intelligence or something changes, it would then make a difference, and you would then start to see the difference coming through. And obviously, if we're getting less income coming through, it would be reflected in that balancing figure up in the transfer from the investment programme. But at the moment, the intelligence is telling us that it is kind of on track. We did make some realignments at the start of the year, but just based on what we were expecting. So yeah, that's still our current thinking on it. Again, it may change because these papers were pulled together maybe about kind of 6-8 weeks ago. So we're now starting to work on the next round of projections, and we might start to see some changes once these get taken account of. But at the moment, that's the current version of it. If that helps.
If I may just come back in that, thank you for that explanation. I understand that in that you have to produce that a balanced set of figures. But what it doesn't do is actually show the volatility that we're going through and what you're needing to do to make those adjustments. So it doesn't flag up to us any kind of issues that we've got and facing on an everyday basis when we get adjustments made and then a set of figures presented to us which are neatly balanced. I wonder if it's possible just to, in some way, to reflect that and actually show where the adjustments have been made. So that we can see where some of the challenges lie in the shorter term.
Yeah, as we move forward, we are very likely to see changes. I can't see that it would necessarily remain stable for the full year. As we kind of move forward and get better intelligence, and you will see that. And we won't do any more realignments. That was just like at the start of the year. This is what we would expecting it to be coming through. So I would expect to see that, if that answers that question, see the changes.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Houston. No other questions? We're asked to note this report again. Okay, Councillor McPherson, sorry. You're muted, Alistair.
Yeah, I couldn't get my hand up. Gillian, in relation to what you just told Councillor Houston, then, is it safe to say then, without that transfer over, that the figures down below which are balanced, then we could probably have a shortfall over £2 million then? Is that the challenges you're facing then?
Sorry, I missed the start of that, Councillor McPherson.
Yeah, is it fair to, based on the information you gave Councillor Houston there, is it fair to assume then that without that transfer over of in excess of £2 million, the challenges in the rents and everything would be in the region of £2 million? Because without that detailed information, it's difficult to tell.
I'm really sorry. I'm not getting it coming through very well in terms of the what you're.
Right. Well, based on the information, or you just discussed there with Councillor Houston.
Yes.
And obviously, Councillor Houston asked the question why these balanced, and you said they've got to balance, okay? But I think you said there that the transfer to investment programme and such like is £2.2 million rather than number 5 or 5 or 6 down in the list here. So what kind of figures are we talking about then? Was there a shortfall? It's balanced now, but what was the shortfall in the income below? Was it roughly £2 million?
At the current time, we're not projecting a variance in the income at all, Councillor McPherson. The difference is all in the spend. It's all in the, basically it's the kind of repairs and maintenance absorbing the additional cost for the tech services. That's the bulk of it. We've got some minor underspends around supervision and management, which is effectively employee costs. Some minor changes in the property costs. We've got some savings in the loans charges, and that's where we're balancing it off in the transfer to the investment programme. Just that one line.
Yeah, thanks for that, Gillian. We've got a meeting next week with the head of housing. I'll probably, I'm probably not making my case properly or making it clear enough, but I'll take it up with the head of housing out of this meeting. Thank you.
Thanks.
I mean, I think if I'm picking it up correctly, Gillian, but no, Councillor McPherson's absolutely right. In April, you predicted 20 million of rent income. That hasn't changed any. You're still predicting 20 million, give or take. Would that be a fair assessment?
That's correct. That's when we pulled together the paperwork. That's what we were expecting.
Okay, but we'll maybe delve into that a bit more. Certainly, I know it's a paper that gets to Hague and it's debated in detail there. Okay, thank you. Right, with no more questions, I'll move on to the next paper. Strategic housing investment. Over to you again, Stephen.
Sorry, can I interrupt? Sorry, it's Michelle the clerk here. It's just to make sure the committee's agreed to note that previous paper.
I had said that previous,
Michelle.
Michelle.
Sorry. Right.
Okay.
No,
yeah, okay, but thanks for that intervention.
Sorry.
Yeah, agreed to note. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. It's Stephen Clark, Chief Officer for Housing. So this is the Strategic Housing Investment Plans. Long-standing committee members will be aware of the annually produced SHIP, which is a document we publish listing all potential future developments they're aware of that could be developed out within the next 5 years. And we submit this document to the Scottish Government on an annual basis. This informs the allocation of Scottish Government resources, so they're aware of what the programme and grant requirement is for each local authority area, and then we can potentially to increase or reduce the allocation of funding. The Scottish Government has recently upped the target from 100,000 affordable homes over the next 10 years to 110,000 affordable homes over the next 10 years. So I would expect to see an increase in the level of funding going forward. Section 2.1 of the report notes that around £52 million in funding will be available to fund developments in Stirling during the next 5 years. Section 2 also notes that we're targeting 15% of properties as specialist provision for needs such as wheelchair users. Section 2.9 shows the potential for 1,260 affordable homes to be delivered during the next 5 years. So, committee is asked to agree, the submission of the Strategic Housing Investment Plan to the Scottish Government based on the projects identified in Appendix 2. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, Stephen. Any questions? Stephen, I've already asked you this question in a different forum, but land availability is going to determine very much what we do years 2 onwards. Maybe you could give some reassurance that we're going to be okay, the risk register, etc.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. We're quite reliant on the affordable housing policy to access sites for development. So the health of the construction industry is important to us. It seems to be very heated. It seems to be very strong at the moment. So we'd expect to see sites coming up quite regularly. The flip side is the actual reverse is true. If the housing market went into a crash, it would provide us with additional opportunities as well, because other developers wouldn't be able to make sites viable that we could potentially take forward. But I think, as I said, we are quite reliant on some of the larger sites coming forward to see the sort of level of supply that we want to during the next 2 years, although we are obviously taking on some sites that are, for example, in the council's ownership to take forward in the next years as well to boost our potential for opportunities for development.
Okay, all right. I've got Councillor McPherson, Earl, Tollemache and Houston. So
yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, Stephen, in relation to 2.7 and page 67, and Councillor Thompson alluded there, and I said this in another forum, and I have said this as well. I personally, and there's evidence here that the 5% wheelchair accessible homes is wholly inadequate. And, you know, I think reading background papers, you know, they could be up to 400 households relying on these and going forward in future years. And I don't think the 5% goes anywhere near enough. And, you know, it's great if we're doing it at 2.6, you know, that 15% will always for special provision, but that's not wheelchair accessible homes here. And these are life changing. We should never underestimate how life changing it is to have a home that's wheelchair accessible for somebody that relies on it. My mother in her latter years was in a wheelchair, and I know the challenges she faced. So, you know, I would like to hear your views on the 5%, and it is connected probably to the next paper as well, to be honest, but I feel strongly that this does not go far enough.
Thanks for your question, Councillor McPherson. I mean, it's a minimum target. I think one of the challenges for us is that a lot of sites have already been designed that haven't yet been built out, and it's hard to change things that have, you know, master plans or things that have gone to planning already. So that can be difficult. In terms of the council and what we're building out, we'll definitely meet that target, and it will definitely exceed that target, but it might be more challenging for us to engage with RSLs and private developers who may have developments, etc. It's something that we'll flag up to all private developers through the affordable housing policy. But it's also a concern to me that there's not enough wheelchair housing or not enough specialist provision being provided by the private sector either. And I think that places a pressure on the social rented sector to provide that, because it's not something the private sector is routinely developing. And I think that's it's a great concern for me, that area. But I acknowledge your concerns. And as I say, it would be a 5% minimum target. I think for the first few years, it might be difficult because of some of the existing sites, but I would want to see that level of provision increase as time goes on.
Chair, can I come back on a few points here? Because Stephen's right in relation to the private sector. There's no planning conditions that we can enforce currently, you know, to make builders do that. And the reason they don't do it is that there's bungalows and they eat up probably 2 plots of land. You would have 2 mid-terraces house on them. Something that's in the construction industry, I know that's the case. So we can't do that via the planning legislation or building standards legislation, but I think we should be a trailblazer. We should be setting an example. We really need to go far beyond the 5%. I think the background papers I saw there's going to be a huge unmet demand, you know, if we only even meet to the 5%. So, you know, it's a cause of real concern to me, that. And so, you know, let's just see what the Scottish Government going forward. I know I've been the old asking that they should be introducing legislation to do that. You know, because unless we can force developers to do it through planning regulations or building regulations, they just won't do it, and they never have done it for the very reasons I stated. So, Chair, this is a really important issue, and you and I are going to a photo walk tomorrow in Catherine Street in Bannerman, where the council has built, you know, the wheelchair accessible homes, and it transforms people's lives, and you should never underestimate that.
Thanks for that, Councillor McPherson. Right, I've got I've got Drew. Do you want to come in to add to that point? Maybe?
Yeah, I was just to follow up on Councillor McPherson's point, the new national planning framework draft that was issued on the 10th of November makes specific reference to local strategies informing that in the way forward, and I think the opportunity exists there. They mentioned bringing forward evidence reports and local strategies to address these inequalities, gaps or specialist gaps as well. So I think an opportunity exists, and I'm sure Chris and Mark Laird will be able to support some further discussion on that.
Okay. Perhaps that's something we could bring, if it's a planning issue, we could bring it to the next meeting of the planning and roads working group. Excuse me. Okay, thank you. Councillor Earl and Councillor Tolmack.
Thank you, Jim. Just 2 points. One following on from Councillor McPherson's point about the wheelchair accessible. To what degree do we ensure that our standard properties are easy to convert if needed, or as and when needed, from a point of view of making sure we put in door width openings that are compatible with wheelchair access. For simple things in the basic design that can make later conversion much simpler and easier. It's one question. I've then got a question about the future development programme.
Thanks for your question, Councillor Earl. I think it's important to note that we meet a certain standard, we're required to meet a certain standard called the Housing for Varying Needs Standard. This standard is up for review by the Scottish Government at the moment, potentially to be increased. It's not a standard that is applying to the private sector, although building standards have changed in recent years, and it is now closer to the Housing for Varying Needs Standard. My colleague Gregor Whiteman might be better placed to maybe explain some of the things that we do in that standard which can help adapt houses more easily going forward. Gregor?
Yeah, Gregor Whiteman, Property and Private Sector Housing Manager, Housing Services. Yeah, as Stephen explained, it's a condition of Scottish Government grant that all new build properties have to meet this Housing for Varying Needs standards, and that's exactly what it says on the tin, that should a future occupier of one of our new build social rented properties need adaptations, whether it's for wet floor showers on the ground floor, low threshold entrances at front doors, etc., that's already built in. So if we take an example of a 2-storey new build house, then there'll be somewhere on the ground floor, it may be constructed as a large storeroom, but within the floor of that will be a drainage pipe and a cover on that goes underneath the flooring. So if someone in that household then becomes a wheelchair user, that can quickly be converted into a wet floor shower area and wash facilities for that individual. There's also a higher standard called fully wheelchair accessible standards, and that's part of the SHIP, where we say that we're looking to achieve a minimum 5% target, so that we will, there's a slightly higher standard, and that talks about door widths and turning circles, etc., for full wheelchair users. Housing for Varying Needs is more the varying need, and for those who have mobility issues that may have Zimmers, etc., easily be able to transfer from one room to another, and it can easily be adapted for ground floor wash facilities, etc. So yeah, I mean, examples of that are Catherine Street that Councillor McPherson referred to. We've got 2 full wheelchair accessible houses. The rest are all housing for varying needs. And down at this, what we call Site 8 in Raploch that Robertsons are developing for us, there will be 2 large ground floor flats that will be fully wheelchair accessible. And that includes also the kitchen units as well, so that you have a rise and fall kitchen units to allow people and wheelchair users to be able to live independently in those properties. So there's 2 standards, but all have to be at least meeting the Housing for Varying Needs standards.
No. Thank you. Thanks, Gregor. That was interesting and helpful. My other point was just page 2.967. Jim's kind of come at this from a land supply use as well, but it's just to get a feel from yourself, Stephen, and any other relevant officers, that the programme going forward on this SHIP feels less secure potentially than it has been in forward years. It talks about the potential to deliver 1,260, and when you look at the forward potential, the sites and the situation of those sites and potential developments, there's a lot of eggs in a few quite speculative baskets at the moment, and it's just to get a feeling from the officers about this and about how they feel about where that might go and what the backup scenarios are.
Thanks for your question, Councillor Earl. There's a number of opportunities, there's a number of sites. Some, as I said before, it does somewhat rely, some of these sites, on the health of the housing market in terms of willingness for developers to take on and build out the bigger sites such as South Stirling Gateway and Jury's Hill, East Fillin, and so on. So those are helpful in terms of getting the numbers up. If they don't come forward as quickly, that could have an impact in terms of our numbers. We are always willing to look at other opportunities. We may, there's things that we could do to potentially mitigate against some sites not coming forward. We could increase our second home acquisitions. We could be looking at other sites. Generally, the issue for us that we can't really go out into the market and buy land on the open market for market rates, because it becomes prohibitively expensive for us to develop out. I would say that the biggest threat to this programme isn't necessarily the availability of land. It is more the concern about significant increases in construction costs, which is we're still a little bit uncertain as to whether they're going to be here to stay or if this is the new normal. And we're looking at costs coming through for future sites. And there are some concerns that there's been an increase in construction costs. At the same time, there's heightened standards for us to address, such as having fire suppression systems and a move towards more zero emissions housing. And these are important and useful things, but it does place some strain on us in terms of being able to deliver housing which are cheap enough for us to buy and rent and keep our rents still low. However, grant levels have been increased by the Scottish Government to partly mitigate against cost increases as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Drew, you got your hand up. Is it on the same point? You're muted, Drew.
Sorry, it's just to follow on from what Stephen said there, Councillor Erland, that I've spoken to a number of the developers through working with the planning service, and they are very focused on delivering developments that are in the Stirling area. Development viability is a significant concern for them, and they've been willingly having open conversations about what they need to do. So the planning service are heavily involved in some of these key developments at the moment, and I think most of them are progressing positively at this moment in time. So, and hopefully we'll see some applications back at panel for decisions in the near future.
Jim, sorry, if I could just ask, if I could just come back on a broader point there that has come up through the development approach. What's the feeling of the relationship we have with developers generally across the Stirling area? Because I'm getting mixed messages, to be honest with you, about how developers view the approach from the council and from the planning service, from a point of view of enabling development and being, you know, positive and supportive. I am getting mixed messages on that, to be honest with you. So, you know, I think I need to mention that to you, because that's concerning if you know, that's the case there. And I just, you know, what's the view of the service on this?
Yeah, Councillor, I'll come back in on that, and I think at this moment in time, the service are working hard to enable some pretty big developments. We're working collaboratively with the developers. I think there's always challenges and perhaps different views on how things should be addressed. I would say that where things have got more complex, we've involved our colleagues from legal services to support the discussions, because they are often complex, and the challenges and you know, the view of the developer is not always the fair view and how we might approach it. We'll also have to look at our policies and approaches as well. I'd be happy, you know, if you have specific instances, please raise them with us, you know, directly, because I think this, you know, that type of feedback is useful as well, and we'll aim to provide clarity. Obviously, some of these developments are the Section 75 discussions would need to remain confidential and things like that, but you know, that feedback that you're getting as well would be useful to the service.
Yeah, I'll do that, Drew. I'll come back to you on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ptolemack, then Councillor Houston.
Okay, thank you. A few of the questions that I have already been addressed, but I have one question. What's the anticipation at the end of this time that the waiting list for houses, council and for other providers, will be up or down or about the same? So what's the impact on this going to have, excuse me, on the waiting list?
Thanks for your question, Councillor Tolomash. I think it's important to note that the first couple of years of the current 700 homes target, it was quite slow progress. Some of the big sites, such as Ratblock, were taking a while to really start on site and get going and so on. Now we're in a really positive year where we've got several hundred affordable housing units coming forward. That will really help movement on the waiting list, will really help us with the level of homeless households waiting temporary accommodation and so on. The important thing is for us to have a consistent supply of affordable housing coming out year on year in sites across Stirling. And if we can keep doing that, I would foresee us potentially bringing the waiting list down slightly, but I can't foresee it being significant. I can't imagine the waiting list being halved, but what I'd like to see is movement on that waiting list so that people aren't waiting for prolonged periods for permanent accommodation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Houston.
Thank you, Chair. I was encouraged by Gregor Whiteman's explanation about the use of wheelchairs and accessibility, etc., which kind of, as I say, encouraged me that it was more than 5% was being achieved. I was going to ask, why? What implication does it have if we built more houses that were wheelchair accessible, i.e., just broader doorways, for instance? Because from what Gregor was saying, some of the housing are already equipped with underfloor plumbing, etc., ready to be used if required. So if there's is there a way that we could future-proof that without a huge cost? As I say, for instance, just widening doorways. And I also was wondering about the whole thing about zero emissions houses. As we've just come out of COP26, we've declared a climate emergency and Stirling support it, and yet I don't see anything here in our intent about how we build these houses. Much better to do it with new house builds for zero emissions, etc., than try to retrofit them at some other later stage when the regulations no doubt will change and bring enforcements in. Should we not be doing that right now? Ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps, all of that. Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Councillor Houston. A couple of points to provide a bit more information on there. In terms of our standards, we do find that some wheelchair users can make use of our lower cottage flats. A lot of the lower cottage flats that we build will put wet floor showers in. And if we don't, they can be easily adapted for a wheelchair user. So not every wheelchair user will require a wheelchair house standard, so there is that flexibility there. I suppose the biggest barrier for wheelchair users in a standard sort of end terraced house is really the stairs. Although you can put a through floor lift in, it's not perfect solution. But as I say, for the stock where we're building a significant number of lower cottage flats or bungalows which aren't the wheelchair standard, they may well still be perfectly suitable for a number of tenants that could have specialist provision requirements. In terms of what our intent is about zero emissions homes, it's a fair point. It's a good question. We are already building very highly energy efficient housing at the moment. They're among the most energy efficient housing being built in Stirling at the moment. Gregor Whiteman could probably give us a bit more detail on that. I would say we're already meeting a very high standard, and I think our intention will be to increase that standard, potentially by use of a fabric first approach to properties. So that's increasing the insulation levels further. We are looking at technology at the moment, and there's a little bit of uncertainty across the housing sector in terms of what is the most appropriate form of heating at the moment, because there is a push towards air source heat pumps, which do require mechanical ventilation, which requires an annual service, and you're obviously having to power that. So we do have some concerns that using that type of technology could increase the level of fuel poverty, because the running costs are higher than gas central heating. And additionally, we're aware that most of the boilers being fitted today are easily converted to use for hydrogen. So if we're building out sites now and we're not fitting the gas network in, and hydrogen becomes the favoured energy source, it's very expensive to then retrofit gas to gas or hydrogen into the grid after we've done so. We will be considering that for many of our developments going forward, though. Gregor Whiteman, I don't know if there's anything else you want to say about energy efficiency of our homes and what we're looking to do for the future.
Yeah, thanks, Gregor Whiteman, Property and Private Sector Housing Manager. In terms of the standards we're achieving, not only for our new builds, but also for our existing stock, I mean, we're way ahead of every other registered social landlord. We're already sitting at near enough 60% of our stock meeting the new standard that all social landlords have to meet by 2032. And that's a minimum energy performance certificate rating of B or above. And that's where it's deemed that the energy efficiency rating of a property is removed as a driver for fuel poverty. So that's been our first approach. The second approach is that where the housing service itself leads on the design of new builds, we are already playing about with U values for properties whereby, as Stephen said, it's a fabric first approach. So by increasing the energy efficiency of the walls, the floors, the roofs, you then reduce heat demand. So whilst you may still be putting in gas boilers at this stage, the amount of gas required to comfortably heat a home is significantly lower than it would be for housing stock from 1960s, 1970s. I would concur with everything that Stephen said about the direction of travel for social landlords in terms of low carbon or net zero. There's different interpretations as to how that is interpreted. So, for example, all our new builds that we're delivering just now are all achieving a very, very high A-rated standard, and the calculated environmental impact rating of those properties is actually negative. So we've completely offset any carbon in those properties. So I think it's just a question of we just have to keep waiting to see how the technology develops. We're highly conscious that even with the rises in gas over the last 3-4 months, gas is still a lower cost fuel than electricity, and we're always conscious of this dilemma that yes, you try and move to new technologies such as air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, but you don't then drive existing tenants into fuel poverty by pushing them on to an energy source that is actually more expensive than what may be available within a site such as gas. So we're constantly monitoring it. It's a challenge that all social landlords in Scotland are discussing internally to see what the way forward is. But yes, fabric first approach, increasing the U values of our own new builds, and unfortunately there's little we can do to influence units being delivered by developers through Section 75 agreements, because as far as they're concerned, as long as it achieves the building standards to get the building warrant, that's good enough. But what we do with our new builds being delivered by new developers is that before the first tenants go in, we significantly increase the microgeneration on those properties by putting on bigger PV systems, battery storage, etc., so that the new tenants moving in can benefit from that.
Okay, thanks, Gregor. Councillor McPherson, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, Chair, just a couple of quick things there. I think that a report that's worth reading is Achieving Net Zero in Social Housing. I'm reading it here just now, and I was aware of it, and it was the Zero Emissions, the Social Housing Task Force report came out at the end of August. So, you know, I was going to discuss that a future meeting with the housing official. That came out at the end of August. Very, very interesting reading how they're going to achieve that. But Gregor's right, there's significant challenges in there with pushing new housing down the road off air source heat pumps. I've tried a couple myself over the last few years, and they are expensive to run. I get that, and do require maintenance, but definitely the way ahead. And I've been in contact with Brian Roberts over the super village Jury's Hill, where they want to bring gas in there for the 3,200 houses up there. So, and I know the hydrogen, you know, easily convert these, but that's sending the wrong message out. You know, if you don't have the amount of house number there, you know, to put in something a wee bit more technology and more zero achieving than bringing gas in, you know, it just beggars belief that they want to do that. You've got economies of scale, 3,200 houses, to bring in something a bit different. It sits on coal. Let's do geothermal. So we are, believe me, you know, Deputy Chair, I'm trying to drive forward change as well. But Chair, I think it's important to say, Stephen Clark mentioned from the outset about not being able to force ourselves to put in more wheelchair housing, but What these RSLs have got to realise is that the council gives them land, HRA land, to build houses on. That's former tenants' money. So, you know, we do have a lever in there and say, well, look, you know, we've given you this land, but we expect you to match what the council's doing here. Minimum 5%, hopefully maybe 10%. So, you know, I think that's definitely got leverage in there to force our RSL partners to do that and to achieve that when we're transferring land which previously owned by council tenants under their council land at zero value. Allow them to do that. So there is a bit of leverage in there. And Chair, the last thing I was going to say, and Leslie mentioned about Section 75 discussions being private. During the negotiations they are, but a Section 75 agreement becomes a public document when it's in the land registry. So, you know, we should not be scared. And in fact, you know, I've spoken to officials in the past that once that's done and registered in the land registry, that should be put on the planning schedule to let people see what we've managed, not to extract, but, you know, what we actually achieved through our developer contribution supplementary planning guidance. So, you know, that, albeit the negotiations are private, the end result should be published in the planning schedule. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Stephen, I won't ask you to respond to that, but I think you've picked up the point about RSLs. And we have representation on both rural Stirling and Forth. So perhaps that's where we ought to be pushing that. Right, no more hands. We're asked to approve this report. Are we content to put it forward for submission? Okay, no dissenting votes, so thank you for that. Okay, next one again, housing. Stephen, Graystale Road.
Thanks, Chair. So this report provides some detail on our proposals to develop new build council housing in St Ninians. Section 1 of the report notes that this land is owned by the Housing Revenue Account, and we previously had tenement flats built here in the 1950s, which were knocked down as part of regeneration activity in this area around 15 to 20 years ago. Section 1 also notes that consideration was given to selling this land on the open market for development. However, that decision was deferred from Finance and Economy Committee, and officers were asked to consider alternative options for the site. Section 2 of the report explains that officers have considered the options for the site and feel the development of this site for council housing is the best option given that there is high demand for social housing in this area. Section 2.3 shows that we're looking at building 40 properties, mainly homes, with a range of house types and sizes, including homes suitable for wheelchair users. The report also explains that we'll need to apply for planning permission to build homes here, and we would then appoint a builder through external procurement. So in terms of recommendations, Environment and Housing Committee is asked to approve the proposal to develop council housing for the HRA owned site at Graystale Road in St Ninians. And secondly, note that proceeding with procurement for new build residential construction at Graystale Road will require approval of the Environment and Housing Committee in terms of the procurement. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Open up for comments. Any questions? Rather, Councillor McGill.
Yeah, thanks, convener. It was just to say that I don't have Appendix 1. It mentions Appendix 1 in the text, but I don't have one in a copy, so I don't know what that. I think it's a map, but I don't have it.
I believe it was distributed, Susan, after the event. Stephen?
I think it was something that Councillor Earl had raised. I think there was maybe an issue because it's quite a complex plotted PDF document that it's maybe not been picked up by the printer. It is available electronically. If you click on the electronic link, it should be visible with that method. Or alternatively, I can forward it to you as a PDF following the meeting.
I can have a look online first. If I need to, I'll get in touch. Thanks.
Okay, I would just note that it is an indicative layout. It is obviously subject to planning, so it is not the absolute final development. It's just providing members with an idea of what it could look like.
Okay, thank you. All right, I've no hands up to ask questions of this. I mean, it's a good news story. More council houses getting built. It's a nice site as well. So we're asked to approve the development and second to note that the future procurement will come back. Are we content with that? Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Stephen, for your input over those last few items. Move on to item 11, Order of Malta Dialogue Journey update.
That'll be me, Chair. David Hopper,
David.
Service Manager for Sustainable Development and Public Transport. This report is requested by committee to give an update the performance of the services provided by Order of Malta Dialogue Journey over this year. Appendix 1 contains some detailed statistics on the performance. We've got Rob Plews on the call to answer any questions, should there be anything around the actual performance, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, Councillor Gibson.
Yeah, Jim, it was just a highlight for the purposes of the record. It's not a registrable interest in that sense, but a declarable interest rather, but obviously there's a registered interest on the Council's nominated board member on Order of Malta Dialogue Journey. So it's just to make that clear for transparency.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McGill.
Yeah, hi. I just wondered, I see at 2.1 it mentions it's a service that's open to members. I just wondered, what is the process of that? How do you become a member, and what does the membership entail? Is it a cost involved? And who can apply for that?
Because there are two services we're talking about. We're talking about the door-to-door journey service, and we're also talking about the mobility service at the Thistles. I'll ask Rob just to explain the memberships.
Hello, Chair. Rob Plews, Public Transport Team Leader. Anyone who's can register by following the link on the website. So it's open to anyone who's got mobility issues, who have problems accessing normal registered bus services. So it may be that they've got need a wheelchair or have a walking frame and so on, and they will assess the application form. There is no cost, but it's just an application form that they go through the website, and if they don't have access to the website, then they can just call up their offices and they'll assist with that completion process.
Okay, Councillor Earl.
Thank you, Jim. Just a couple of questions. Can you just remind us, David or Rob, how the money's split? Because there's two, what the purposes are, because it's 120k and 21k, or what that effectively covers, and why it's split into two pots. And following on from Councillor McGill's question, what I was going to ask was, how is it promoted?
Okay, just on the budgetary question, the 121k relates to the door-to-door journey service, and the 21k relates to the mobility service. That's the scooters that operate out the bus station at the Thistles.
Thanks, David.
In terms of promotion, Rob, do you want to just answer that?
Yeah, so it's on our web pages, so we can direct people towards that. It's just on the general public transport pages where it talks about finding information on public transport, and obviously expands to the additional services through taxicard or the Dialogue Journey services. In addition to that, it's promoted through Dialogue Journey themselves.
So just through any of those mechanisms, are people, when they receive treatment at the NHS or discharged from hospital, are they provided details of it?
I'm not fully versed in what they do to promote it. However, I can give additional information on Dialogue Journey have been involved in the vaccination system of vaccination transport throughout the pandemic, and they've had new users through that have become members because of the service they've received getting to and from vaccination appointments. They're also looking at additional agreements with the care partnership, and it'll be promoted through that as well.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Tolmach.
Thank you, Convener. What way does Dialogue Journey communicate with its members, potentially are not on the internet and do not have computers? What way does it communicate with them? What changes possibly to services, conditions and things? And is there a regular communication, like a newsletter to them that you receive? I'm just interested if the numbers to return, communication is a vital thing.
Rob, are you more familiar with answering that question?
I can't provide an answer at the moment. However, I can get back to you with an update on that one.
Okay, that'd be great, because I think that's really a very thing that needs to be looked at. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, on that very point, Robert, there was a time I did see on notice boards, and I think it was Cornton Community Council, but I have no recollection of that still being posted. But given the numbers are down because of the pandemic, it might be that we ought to be promoting this more. Okay, thank you. Right, no more hands up. We're asked to note the contents of the report. We're happy with that. Move on to the next item. And it's item 12, Sustainable Stirling, Public Bodies Climate Change Duties Annual Report. David, are you going to introduce this?
Yeah, that's me again. I've got Angela Haney on the call, who's the author of the report, can answer any questions. So this report asks for approval of the Council's annual Sustainable Stirling report, which we are obligated to pull together and send to Scottish Government on an annual basis, part of our public duties. It covers the year from April 2020 to March 2021. Over this period, emissions are estimated to have reduced by 8.3% compared with the previous year, taking our total reduction to almost 50% since the baseline year of 2006-07. This represents an average annual reduction of our emissions of around 3.6%, that if maintained into the future would see the Council meet its annual emission reduction target of 75% by 2030. So we are on a reasonably good trajectory, albeit the more challenging fruits are yet to be picked on this. And there's a lot of detail in the report. So as I say, Angela's on the call, so I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tolmach.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got three questions. One, does the council on an annual basis do an audit on its buildings for the energy consumption and how it compares year on year?
I can't answer that question precisely, but we do obviously gather the data. Whether there's a comprehensive audit done on an annual basis, perhaps Drew might be able to answer that question better than me.
Yeah, Drew Leslie, Senior Manager for Infrastructure. Yeah, Councillor Tolomars, the consumption's reviewed in a lot of detail. It obviously contributes to that report. So the data on a per building basis is available. I would also note that the infrastructure service are commissioning more detailed energy assessments on all our properties. We obviously have EPCs for those that I think are over 250 square meters, I think, for the larger properties. But these energy assessments are aligned with the expected work that we'll have to do in line with the Scottish Government's heat and building strategy. So that's, this is our initial base preparation for how we're going to bring these up or contribute towards the net zero target.
Thank you. With the reduction of 3.6%, when we're heating our buildings, whilst more people are working from their own properties, from home, could part of the 3.6% reduction be the fact that we haven't been heating our buildings to the same extent that we've had before? And if that is the case, to then do an extrapolation that it's 3.6% reduction in a period when the buildings and other things, like we probably haven't used our transport as much as we normally done. So all of these factors, is it a true reflection then to extrapolate that to 2030 when there are other factors here?
Just to correct the figure, the 3.6% is the average annual reduction that we've seen since the year 2006-07. Last year we experienced an 8.3%, probably one of the biggest reductions we've seen.
Okay, well, thank you for that.
Yeah. So yes, there is quite a significant drop this year, largely related to the pandemic and related issues. But I believe we still had to heat our properties. So whilst gas has come down to some extent in buildings, they still have to continue to heat properties. And I think I'm right in saying, Angela, that have we captured the corresponding energy consumption relating to working from home? I think Angela's on the call.
Hi, Angela Heaney, Senior Sustainable Development Officer. Yeah, there's a new figure that we've been asked to include in this year's report, which is on page 130. Home working emissions. It's a factor that is based on number of staff working from home, and I think it was the Carbon Trust brought together this factor. Clearly there's a lot of averaging and assumptions made in there, and it takes into account commuting and average properties, etc., etc. Unfortunately, we hadn't collected detailed numbers of staff working from home, so I spoke to a number of other councils and came up with a 25% figure for this year. But as David already mentioned, we were still having to heat buildings, and we actually saw an increase in gas use, of emissions from gas use of 3.5%. And some of that will be down to having to open windows because of the coronavirus. So we were actually heating buildings more. I know also some biomass boilers, there were some issues there. So we were having to use gas backup boilers as well.
Okay, thank you for that. And my last question is about procurement and the amount that we're trying to do when we do procurement, that we take in carbon usage from the suppliers we have into account. That's my question there. So is that a thing that we look at and we to try and get reduction from that?
These are essentially our emissions from immediate day-to-day operations. So they don't factor in embedded carbon in our products directly. That's a progressive piece of work that we need to do and work closely through our procurement strategy, so that we are encouraging suppliers to, embed low carbon ethics into their service designs. There's a big journey on this, as you will appreciate, Councillor Tallmarsh, but these are direct emissions that we're measuring at this stage.
So perhaps in a report we get next year, we can see what progress we've done on that.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Hutchison, followed by Councillor McPherson.
Thanks, Jim. My question relates to page 136, the paragraph 2 about improving understanding of flood risk, and specifically the bit about Strathblane. It says a flood study for Strathblane identified in the Clyde and Loch Lomond FRM plan commenced in 2020, currently at the end of stage 1. Great. Further data gathering will take place until summer 2022, with gauges and cameras being placed at strategic locations. Now, I know that there is a lot of concern locally about surface water in Station Road and Blaine Crescent, particularly during rainstorms. I know that the installation of gullies has commenced near the top of Station Road, but local residents are not reporting any sightings of gauges or cameras. And I just really wanted to seek reassurance that that work will be carried out in Station Road and in Blaine Crescent, particularly where there are a lot of very elderly residents.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not familiar with the detail of the flood alleviation plan, so I see Bruce has got his hand up. I'll refer to him.
Thanks, David, and thanks, Councillor Hutchison, for the question. It's Bruce Rickey, Senior Manager for Environment and Place. Certainly that was the plan, to put in gauges and cameras. I know that some of the work has been delayed, Councillor Hutchison, but what I'll do is I'll get an update from the team in terms of the timescale for their implementation and come back to you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor McPherson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, it's page 145. It's probably for Angela, this one, in relation to the table here. The industrial and commercial, you've got the CO2 emissions for Stirling, and I've had a long-term interest in the Northboard, what is now West Fraser plant in Kerry. So, Angela or David, can you let me know how we actually measure this, or do we allow the factory operators to do the measuring of the carbon emissions from that? How do we actually go about that?
I'll let Angela answer that one.
Yeah, this is data that is compiled by on behalf of UK government, and it's always 2 years behind by the time it's been reviewed and agreed. The analysis, we don't have access to the detail of the analysis, unfortunately. So a number of consultants are involved in pulling together the data on a whole range of factors. I think as we move forward and we develop a regional energy master plan, then we will try to get much more local data into that as much as we possibly can, and it'll be a balance between what we receive from UK government, DBIS, and what we're able to gauge locally.
Okay, thanks for that, Angela. Chair, can I come back to that? And it's probably not relevant to this paper, but it's a really important issue here. Is to do with other emissions from factories, especially the one that I mentioned in Kerry here, the residents obviously have to suffer dust pollution on a daily basis still. So I think going forward, I would like to see an air quality monitoring paper at a future committee meeting in here. And I'll tell you why I say that. I was invited to a manager and workplace safer for workers' environment conference at COP26. It was a virtual meeting. I had my eyes open there. So I would like to see a paper going forward here in relation to air quality around about Kerry. And the reason being, and I learned from somebody at that meeting here that during COVID, SEPA were not as proactive as they were previously about monitoring things going forward. Now, that's an allegation. I don't know whether it's true, but it concerns me that during COVID, SEPA officers weren't going out there and monitoring factories like they normally would. So, that concerns me, the allegation. I must emphasise it was an allegation, but let's bring forward a paper on air quality and super glass of residents in Braid have the same issue there. We need to be, these industrial and commercial settings, we must be, other types of emissions other than carbon, every bit is important. Thank you.
Angela, perhaps you would, on that very point, we did purchase new air quality monitors, and I know we were doing pilots at schools, for example. Could you maybe give a wee update on where we are with that?
Sorry, I'll maybe step in and answer for Angela. We did put in the temporary air quality monitoring systems, and our intention ultimately, because they are not they're not measuring to the standard that the EU directive requires, and they're not part of our kind of our formal responses back to government. But there is an intention to develop an air quality strategy. Drew, I'm not clear on the absolute timescales of that, but I know that's a piece of what's discussed in our management team. Perhaps Drew can give a timeline on it.
Drew?
Yep, Drew Lethley, Senior Manager for Infrastructure. We have an officer that was looking at that. Unfortunately, that officer's off sick at the moment, and we will probably need to bring in external resource to support that piece of work, but it is a priority area in the environmental health team's work plan. So I'll come back around when that would come forward, Councillor Thompson.
Yeah.
Chair, can I come back on that very quickly? And I think the concern I've got here is that the Cowley factory was the first factory in the UK to manufacture MDF, and the formaldehyde emissions relating to that was discussed at this COP26 meeting. And and there's evidence throughout the world that can cause nasal cancers and such like, and that's been the experience of people in Cowie in the past. They've always accused that factor of causing cancers. Now that's never ever been substantiated. So I contact Professor Andrew Watterson about it, and he's got back to say, well, I'm doing a piece of work with him, and I'm not in any way accusing the fact that he's doing that, but I really do think that we really need to focus more on other types of emissions other than carbon, as well as carbon, even, to be honest.
Drew, I won't expect you to answer that. I think Councillor McPherson raises some relevant points, and I do know that, as he said, there was issues about Braehead recently. Now, it is SEPA's role, but we have a part to play, and I think can we have that discussion offline, please, and see how we move this forward.
Yeah, that was what I was going to suggest, Councillor Thompson. We'll get a regulatory position across the whole thing, and we can take that to the next conveners meeting as well and give you an update.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Earl.
Thank you. Just a general question, I suppose. I mean, welcome the report. It's thorough. It shows another progress, reduction in emissions. But I mean, as we're all aware, the fruit is getting higher and higher to pick off the tree, and we can't expect this kind of linear decrease to continue. I suppose my question is at what point do we have the difficult conversation collectively about the capacity and cost to pursue further reductions when set against the direct emissions for the council are only 2 to 3% of the area wide? What point do we have that discussion? Because it's surely one we're going to have.
Well, that in part is why we've declared a climate emergency, and we do have that working group looking at that very thing. You're absolutely right. We're doing our bit, but how do we get the public and businesses locally to join in? But I'll invite David and Angela to see what we're doing at the minute and how we move this forward.
No, I think that's a really, really good question, and I think the answer to that is, quite frankly, is now, and in the very near future, because we have enjoyed what we would term the easy picked fruits, and largely a lot of the emission reduction has been done through the utilities companies out with the control of any public authority. But now we realise we have to get our sleeves rolled up. That's been very apparent in the last 2 weeks' discussions at COP26. This is now about taking some quite challenging decisions, particularly around transport and energy. They're the two key areas. Energy is now going to start to focus on heat management. That's a big piece that we're going to have to look at. The development of heat management systems. There's statute coming through as we speak on putting more pressure on local authorities to look at that. Renewables, again, is coming back on the scene. And how affordable renewables are. Energy efficiency, as we've talked about in previous papers, there is a big piece, and fundamentally that's what we should be looking at first and foremost. And on the transport theme, which has always been the challenging one, we have seen limited improvements on transport over the last 20 years. That's where we're going to have to make some tough decisions, and that's going to have to look at the types of vehicles we're moving. Big push on public transport, and public transport is on its knees literally post-pandemic. It needs to be injected with a lot more resources and ambition. And then the move towards electric vehicles is significant. I should also add, though, that active travel is top of the hierarchy. Rather, the need not to travel in the first place is top of the hierarchy, but active travel is another one. So those big decisions will be had over the coming year or two, and how much public authorities are willing to invest in this. It's going to be prominent.
Yeah, thank you. It's just I want to try and get a feel for this, because indirect and direct emissions and enabling and facilitating from this local authority's point of view is going to become increasingly the important thing to do. And we cannot continue to chase direct emissions reductions when they only equate to 2 to 3% of the total when it gets beyond practical capacity to do so. We have to direct our fire to our wider enabling role through our policies and our interventions to make sure that there's much bigger reductions in the, especially in the two key areas you talk about, David. And I don't want us chasing our tail unnecessarily, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And, you know, as we've talked about before through the Cane Plan development, the local authority's consumption of emissions is less than 2%. And it's how we enable and inspire the wider area to come on this journey. And that is about leadership, and the council showing up, public authorities showing leadership.
Thank you.
Councillor Gibson.
Thanks, Jim. Probably more of a comment, just following on David's theme there for transport. We're probably all quite concerned about the emails we've all had this week in relation to First Bus and service changes, etc. So as we already have a council commitment to a municipally owned bus company, and that's the kind of level of ambition that we should be having for Stirling and its surrounding areas for the entire district. Whilst the email was concerning, I thought this is a great opportunity to get First Bus on board, or rather off board, and to say so I've written them to say, you know, we've got ambitions for you know, municipal public transport here, and you know, are they going to be open to negotiations with council officers to explore the possibilities of services in our area, because that's the kind of scale of commitment. We don't want to see services being cut. But if and the legislation's almost on the cusp of changing, if there's an opportunity there for Stirling Council and to get that proper public transport for the travelling public rather than for shareholders, that would be a great thing to me. So I raise that more to be a comment rather than a question to David, because you know, I know that ambition would be shared by the officers as much as it would be shared. I think actually probably by all councillors, I would hope anyway. You know, that we do get that kind of great provision for Stirling. So it may be a crisis, but I would also not want us to lose that opportunity to better public transport for Stirling.
Chair, if I could just jump in quickly, I know it wasn't a question, but just to highlight the point that and that's absolutely our intentions, and agree with the sentiments of Councillor Gibson. The one holding factor at the moment is the guidance that's coming out following the Act, the 2019 Act, to allow municipal authorities to develop. We await that hopefully for the early part of next year, and then we can act. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Tolmach, you got a further point to make?
It's a comment, just I really agree with Councillor Gibson. What would be possible, if it's appropriate, is an immediate briefing for all of the councillors on what's happening with the bus services in Stirling. I think that is an important thing. We all have constituencies who are stranded, who don't get the buses. There's almost a thing that the bus, the services will be restricted kind of further. We have reports of people not being able to go to doctors' appointments and all things. And I think it's such a crisis. And I think the word we can use is a crisis here. So please, can we have some kind of briefing with all the councillors, please?
Yes, Councillor Thomas, you have asked me for that earlier, and I fully respect the need for it. And what we're trying to do is just seek as much information from First Bus at the moment, because clearly the failures that we're currently seeing have come as a result of First Bus's failures. So we're just trying to make sure that they front this issue as best as possible. So we're just waiting for some final detail. I'm actually in dialogue with their acting chief exec, Duncan Cameron. So as soon as we get the information, we'll make it available to all councillors. We're aiming to try and do that this week.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Tolmach. Okay. No further questions. Again, we're asked to note the report. Thanks again, Angela, for producing this. I can imagine the amount of work that has to go into it, but we get this annual report, and it's very helpful to see how we are managing. And page 127, the trends in the right direction, which is good, albeit, as the point's been made, it's partly impacted by COVID this year. Okay, thanks very much. If we can move on to the next item, designation of local nature conservation sites. Is it Guy that's dealing with this one?
Thanks, Chair. It's Mark Laird, Development Planning Team Leader. I'll present and guys on
okay.
hand to take any questions.
Thank you.
So the paper presents recommendations to approve the procedures for the designation of local nature conservation sites and to agree to commence the process of designating 17 sites within the area covered by the adopted local development plan. These sites are shown mapped in Appendix 1. By way of background, local nature conservation sites identify locally important natural heritage, and they also offer greater protection against the impact of development. The designations themselves do not
excuse me, Convener.
Yeah.
Should be. I don't know whether other people, but the volume is extremely low, and I'm struggling to hear what's being said.
Okay. I can hear you, Mark, but perhaps you want to turn up your volume.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll do that. Thank you, Councillor Tolmash. So yeah, just in terms of the policy context, Scottish planning policy sets out that local planning authorities have a duty to further the conservation of biodiversity. In responding to this duty, the local development plan commits to the identification and protection of local nature conservation sites. And it's also worth noting that within the Council's draft Alive with Nature plan, there's also a commitment in there to designate sites where appropriate. So yeah, happy to take any questions you may have. Thank you.
Questions to Mark or Guy? Councillor McPherson, then Councillor Errol.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jim. This is a comment to you first here. I've obviously watched with interest in July when the Alive with Nature plan was issued, and a photo of yourself and Councillor Gibson down at Kilveen getting a photo taken, and in that document contained a photograph of Graystale, Ross and Flynn, which is the site of the old Polmaze Bing, and next to the old pit head, and the lowland bog there, you know, which is significant of interest to me, and a triple SI, Innerforth Landscape have been involved, you've got SNH involved, Butterfly Conservation Scotland involved because of large heath butterflies, and the photos were contained within the Alive for Nature plan in Flynn, but I don't see it listed. You know, so why is that the case, Mark, that Flynn's missed out despite the fact we used it, a photographic, to publicise this Alive with Nature plan?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor McPherson. I will pass to Guy, but just to clarify more than anything, this is one element of the Alive with Nature plan. But I'll pass to Guy to expand on the sites themselves and the process around that.
Hello, everybody. Guy Harewood, Biodiversity Officer for Stirling Council. Yeah, so Flynn Bing and Wester Moss are considered two separate sites. Wester Moss is not included in the list of local nature conservation site designations because it is already a triple SI, and that designation holds more weight and gives more protection than a local designation would. So the decision has been taken. I should say that the designation of these sites is done in line with a nationally agreed process, which has local variations applied to it. So at a national level, it's decided that where a designation already exists, you don't add a local designation to it. So that's why Wester Moss is not in there. Flynn Bing is down on the longer list, I believe, of potential sites, but the vast majority of the data that goes into the assessment of these local nature conservation sites is gathered by volunteers. And so we designate as and when the data, the biological data, is available. And I would assume, without knowing for sure, that the data for Flynn Bing doesn't exist yet.
Chair, I'll come back on that briefly. You know, Guy, you say it exists on a longer list. It'd be good to see that longer list, because I was surprised that there isn't any stuff in the Bannock Burn as well, in Bannock near the falls and such like, you know, so it would be good to get an understanding of that list. I didn't comment on the consultation, which expired on the 13th of September, on the Flynn Bing and Wester Moss and Flynn Bing, because I thought we'd already be on it, but I know they're about the triple SI anyway, but it would be good to get that information anyway, Guy, if you can give us that long list you're referred to, please.
Yeah, that long list exists and that information can be pulled together, and I'm sure it can be shared.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking the same with Gowan Hill and Ballingeech back walk, Councillor McPherson. So I was surprised that wasn't there, but thanks for that. Councillor Errol.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Thank you, Guy and Mark, for this interesting paper. I've got a few questions about it. How does this designation sit in the hierarchy of relevant designations that can be used? It talks about this being across the entire council area by 2030, 100 designated sites. Is that 100 designated sites of this type or various types of designation? And how does that sit with the ones within the national park area that I'm assuming the national park have the responsibility for designating? What does this mean for the landowners? Is there any financial implications? Does it open up funding opportunities? And do we have the power to put this in place, or does it have to be assessed by another body to say that the biodiversity range is of sufficient type, or is this a self-assessment process?
Okay, I was scribbling down the questions as they were coming, but I'll probably miss some. So tell me if I don't cover everything you asked there. So the landowners, there are no implications for landowners. It's in terms of hierarchy, this is a planning designation. It's done through the planning authority. So there is a distinction between the area that is within the Stirling Council Planning Authority and the area that's within the National Park Planning Authority. And so it's, I think, generally considered to be the lowest level of protection that can be given. Mark might be able to say a bit more on this, but it is referenced in national planning guidance that these should have a lesser protection than SSSIs, but should still be given some weight when it comes to the protection of the natural environment through the planning system. So they don't place any implications or obligations on landowners. In terms of finance, it is hoped, and there is work going on, to try and link the enhancement of these designated sites to the new rural payment system when that comes out. It's been attempted several times over the years and hasn't happened, but they're trying again this time, so that agri-environment funding can be focused on locally designated sites in the way that it's currently available for national or internationally designated sites. Yeah. He asked also about the assessment. So the assessment is done in partnership for our area with TWIC, which is the Wildlife Information Centre, which is the biological records centre that covers this area. And they have the procedures in place. They have the data and the data management processes in place to ensure that the data that's used is as robust as possible. There is an acknowledgement that this is part of the planning system, and so any decision that's made has to be defendable. So they do it in line with the best nationally agreed procedures that have these local tweaks applied to reflect our local priorities. And they do the assessment with a group of volunteers who represent the likes of the Scottish Wildlife Trust and the RSPB and the British Society, the Botanical Society for the British Isles, the BSBI, and others. And they ultimately put a recommendation to the council as to whether they deem the site to be worthy of designation. The council then has to decide whether to designate it or not, and that's what this paper really focuses on. At the moment, there are, I think it's 17 on there that the volunteers have assessed as worthy of designation. We then need to set out the process for agreeing with that and therefore designating the sites.
Okay. I think you hit them all there, so well done. And I just want to follow up one is this designation does not prevent in the future a potential higher designation should it be deemed applicable.
No, it doesn't. No.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. We've got 4 recommendations on page 171. I won't go through them, but I think we all agree to support this moving forward. Okay. Okay, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of this meeting. Can I thank you all for attending, and as usual, thanks to Michelle for making it all run smoothly. Councillor Earl, you've got your hand up.
No, you'd intimated you want to obviously pull the paper, which you had at the start of the meeting, and you, which is a prerogative to do so. But I just wanted to ask, you're going to bring it back to a special one in December.
Yeah.
It was, so you said that areas were not, there were parts of the report that were, because it was written for an earlier report, were not up to date, or contemporary and whatever. And it was just, if we're pulling a paper, it would just maybe, what is it that's not up to date?
I'll pass you over to Brian Roberts. Brian's probably in a better position to give you the detail that I can't. Brian.
Thanks, Convener. Thanks for the question, Councillor Earl. Brian Roberts, Chief Operating Officer for Infrastructure and Environment. So as Chair mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, Councillor Earl, the paper that's tabled was originally supposed to come in September. There are some matters that aren't adequately covered in that paper. I'm conscious that there's an exempt part of that paper, so I don't want to obviously say too much in the public forum. But there's elements in there that need to be confirmed around the likely supply time for the new vehicles, but also particularly the interim arrangements and the cost of those interim arrangements between the current arrangement and obviously the new vehicles coming in. So it would certainly be the officer position that we would recommend deferring the paper until the next meeting, which helpfully there's a special being arranged for December. So that would allow us time to address that issue and make sure that the committee have full information for visibility and accountability.
Yeah, no, thank you. I just think it was important to have that sort of just explained why we're putting the paper, that's all, in an appropriate way. Thank you.
Michelle, you want to come in there?
Yeah, sorry, it's just to get formal agreement from the committee that they are willing to defer that paper to the special meeting, just for the records.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. Yep. I thought it was the prerogative of the chair, but if I've got to get approval, yeah. Okay.
Agreed.
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 Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks, Michelle, for that, and thanks very much for attending. And have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.